The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of our sunroom as my husband Michael's words echoed through our anniversary dinner. "I want a divorce, Sarah. I've already filed the papers this morning." 23 years of marriage, and he chose our wedding anniversary to deliver this news, right after I had finished preparing his favorite meal of herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables. The candles I had carefully arranged flickered in the silence that followed, casting dancing shadows across the dining table set for two. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at Michael across the table, taking in his freshly trimmed hair, the new cologne I didn't recognize, and the expensive watch that had mysteriously appeared on his wrist last month. At 51, he was still handsome in that distinguished way that attracted attention at the country club, but something in his eyes had changed over the past year. The warmth that once made me feel like the luckiest woman alive had been replaced by cold determination. "You filed papers," I repeated slowly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos erupting in my chest. "On our anniversary," Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze as he reached for his wine glass. "The timing isn't ideal, but Sarah, we both know this marriage has been over for years. We're just going through the motions." I felt a laugh building in my throat, but it came out as more of a strangled sound. Going through the motions. Is that what he called the way I had supported him through 3 career changes, 2 failed business ventures, and countless midlife crises? Was that how he described the sacrifices I had made, putting my own dreams of opening an art gallery on hold while I worked double shifts at the museum to keep us afloat during his experimental phases? My name is Sarah Matthews, and until this moment, I had been playing the role of the understanding wife perfectly. I am 48 years old, a curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts, and apparently, I had been living a lie for longer than I cared to admit. "Where are the papers?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Michael pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase, which I now realized had been strategically placed beside his chair. He had planned this moment, choreographed it like one of his marketing presentations. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and bore the letterhead of Henderson, Clark and Associates, a law firm I recognized from their advertisements in the financial district. I reached across the table and took the papers, noting how Michael's hands trembled slightly as he released them. Inside were divorce documents, already signed by his attorney, requesting an expedited dissolution of our marriage. My eyes scanned the pages quickly, my museum training having taught me to process information rapidly and thoroughly. What caught my attention wasn't what was included in the filing, but what was conspicuously absent. There was no mention of our joint savings accounts, no reference to the vacation home in the Hamptons that we had purchased 5 years ago, and most glaring of all, no acknowledgement of the art collection I had been building throughout our marriage, using my own salary and inheritance from my grandmother. "This is interesting," I said, setting the papers down beside my untouched plate. "Very interesting indeed." Michael's confident expression faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" I folded my hands in my lap, a gesture that had become second nature during years of maintaining composure in high-pressure museum board meetings. "I mean that for someone who claims to have been planning this for a while, you've made some rather significant oversights in your documentation." The color began to drain from his face, but he pressed forward with his rehearsed speech. "Sarah, I know this is difficult, but I've been thinking about this for months. We want different things. You're married to your career, and I need someone who can prioritize our relationship. Someone who can prioritize our relationship." The irony wasn't lost on me. This from the man who had missed our last 3 anniversaries due to urgent work commitments, who had forgotten my birthday 2 years running, and who hadn't asked about my day in so long that I had stopped volunteering the information. "Someone like Rebecca?" I asked quietly. The wine glass froze halfway to his lips. "What?" "Rebecca Chen, 29 years old, works in your marketing department, drives a red BMW that matches her lipstick, if the photos on her Instagram account are any indication." Michael set his glass down so hard that wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth. "I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. Michael, I've been a research curator for over 20 years. My job is to verify authenticity, to dig beneath surfaces and uncover truths that others might miss. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the changes? For months I had been documenting his behavior without even realizing I was building a case. The late nights that became routine, the sudden interest in fitness and expensive grooming products, the way he guarded his phone like a state secret, and most telling of all, the credit card statements that showed purchases at restaurants I had never been to, and jewelry stores that had never seen my business. The lunch at Le Bernardin last Tuesday, I continued watching his face grow paler with each word. The earrings from Cartier, that I never received. The weekend business trip to Boston that coincidentally aligned with Rebecca's social media posts from the same city. Michael's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention, I corrected. Something I apparently should have been doing more carefully for the past year. The truth was, I hadn't set out to catch him in an affair. I had simply noticed inconsistencies, the way a curator notices when a brushstroke doesn't match an artist's established technique, or when a provenance document contains anachronistic details. My training had made me naturally observant, and Michael's deception had been neither subtle nor particularly clever. It had started with small things. A receipt for 2 dinners when he claimed to have eaten alone, a charge for premium gas when he had always been obsessive about using regular unleaded, hotel bills for rooms with king beds when his company typically booked standard accommodations for business travel. Then came the more obvious signs. New cologne that I hadn't purchased. A gym membership at a facility across town when there was a perfectly good one 2 blocks from his office. Most damning of all, the discovery of a second phone tucked away in his desk drawer, a phone that buzzed with messages at all hours. I hadn't immediately connected these dots to infidelity. Instead, I had wondered if Michael was having some sort of midlife crisis, perhaps planning a surprise for me or dealing with work stress in ways he didn't want to discuss. It wasn't until I saw him with Rebecca at a coffee shop downtown, his hand covering hers across a small table, that the pieces fell into place. Even then, I hadn't confronted him immediately. Years of working with priceless artifacts had taught me the value of patience, of gathering all available evidence before drawing conclusions. I had spent weeks quietly documenting his activities, not out of vindictiveness, but out of a curator's instinct to preserve truth. Sarah, Michael said, his voice taking on the cajoling tone he used when trying to convince museum donors to increase their contributions. Whatever you think you know, we can work through this. Marriage counseling, a fresh start, whatever you want. I looked at this man I had loved for over 2 decades, noting how his face had taken on the expression of someone who had been caught in a lie, but still hoped to talk his way out of consequences. It was the same look I had seen on the faces of art dealers, caught trying to pass off forgeries as genuine masterpieces. What I want, I said carefully, is for you to be honest with me just this once. How long have you been planning this? Michael's shoulders sagged slightly. 6 months, maybe 8. Sarah, I never meant for it to happen this way. 8 months.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He had been planning to leave me for 8 months while I had been planning our anniversary dinner, researching vacation destinations for the summer, and yes, naively believing that we were working through a rough patch that all long marriages experience. And Rebecca, how long has that been going on? It's not what you think, he said quickly. She's just someone I can talk to. Someone who understands my ambitions. I almost laughed at that. Rebecca, fresh out of business school with her MBA and her designer handbags, understood his ambitions in a way that his wife of 23 years could not. The wife who had supported him through his transition from corporate finance to marketing, who had encouraged him when he wanted to start his own consultancy, who had worked extra hours to cover our expenses when his entrepreneurial ventures failed to generate the income he had projected. I see, I said, and when exactly did you plan to tell me about your ambitions to dissolve our marriage? Michael fidgeted with his napkin, folding and refolding it into increasingly smaller squares. I thought tonight would be appropriate. Clean break, honest conversation, mutual respect for what we've built together. Clean break, as if 23 years of marriage could be dissolved as easily as sugar in water. As if the life we had constructed together, the dreams we had shared, the promises we had made, could be dismantled with the efficiency of a museum exhibit being taken down at the end of a show. And my opinion in this matter, I asked, was that part of your planning process? For the first time that evening, Michael looked genuinely uncomfortable. I know this is hard, Sarah, but surely you can see that we've grown apart. We want different things now. Different things. I wanted honesty, loyalty, and the partnership I thought we had built together. He wanted a younger woman who admired his ambitions without questioning his methods or demanding accountability for his failures. Tell me about the financial arrangements you've made, I said, gesturing toward the divorce papers. Michael's expression brightened slightly, as if we were finally discussing something he felt confident about. I've been very fair, Sarah. You'll keep your retirement accounts, of course, and I'm not asking for any portion of your museum salary. The house will need to be sold, naturally, but we'll split the proceeds equally. I nodded slowly, processing this information. And the Hampton house, that will also need to be sold. Rebecca and I have been looking at properties in Connecticut, something more suited to our lifestyle. Our lifestyle, he was already speaking as if his future with Rebecca was a foregone conclusion, as if I were simply an obstacle to be cleared away like outdated inventory. I see you've given this considerable thought, I said. Tell me, when did you conduct the appraisals for our assets? Michael blinked, clearly not expecting this question. Appraisals? For the house, the Hampton property, my art collection. Surely you had them professionally valued before determining how to divide them equitably. The confusion on his face was answer enough. He had no idea what our assets were actually worth, had made no effort to properly assess the financial implications of divorce, and had apparently assumed that his amateur calculations would suffice for legal proceedings. Sarah, we don't need formal appraisals. We both know roughly what everything is worth. I stood up from the table, moving to the built-in display cases that lined one wall of our sunroom. Inside were pieces from my personal collection, works I had acquired over the years through my connections in the art world, pieces that Michael had never shown much interest in beyond their decorative value. This Degas sketch, I said, pointing to a framed drawing, what would you estimate its value to be? Michael glanced at it dismissively. I don't know, maybe 5,000, 10,000. It's just a sketch. I smiled, running my finger along the frame's edge. It's actually worth closer to 80,000, and that's a conservative estimate. The provenance is impeccable, and Degas sketches have been appreciating rapidly in the current market. The color drained from his face again. 80,000. And this small Monet oil study, I continued, moving to the next piece, the one you always said reminded you of your grandmother's garden. It's worth approximately 120,000. Michael was staring at me now, as if seeing me for the first time. How do you know these numbers? Because unlike you, I had everything professionally appraised last year for insurance purposes. My collection is currently valued at just over $600,000, all of it acquired with my own income and inheritance, all of it documented and certified. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Michael's mind working, recalculating, trying to process the implications of what I had just revealed. His neat little plan for a clean break was becoming considerably more complicated. 600,000, he repeated slowly. That's correct, and since you seem to have forgotten, let me remind you of a few other details that might be relevant to your divorce filing. I returned to the table, pulling out my phone and opening the notes application where I had been keeping careful records. Our joint savings account currently contains $47,000. Our checking account has $18,000. The house, based on recent comparable sales in our neighborhood, is worth approximately $800,000, minus the remaining mortgage balance of $310,000. Michael was no longer eating, no longer even pretending to listen to my words as anything other than a financial recitation that was spiraling far beyond his expectations. The Hampton house, I continued, purchased for $450,000 5 years ago, has appreciated to approximately $700,000, with a remaining mortgage balance of $240,000. Our combined retirement accounts total just over $1.2 million. I set my phone down and looked at Michael, who was staring at me with an expression somewhere between shock and growing panic. So when you say you've been fair in your proposed settlement, I have to ask, fair according to what calculation? Michael's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I had no idea the numbers were so high. Of course he hadn't. For years I had been the one managing our finances, tracking our investments, making sure our insurance was adequate, planning for our retirement. Michael had been content to let me handle these details while he focused on his career, never bothering to educate himself about the wealth we had been accumulating together. There's something else, I said, reaching into the sideboard behind me and withdrawing a folder I had prepared weeks ago. Something I think you should see before we continue this conversation. Michael eyed the folder suspiciously. What is it? Documentation, I said simply, setting it on the table between us. I told you that I've been paying attention, Michael. Perhaps it's time I showed you exactly how much attention I've been paying. Inside the folder were photographs, printed emails, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and phone records. Months of evidence that painted a clear picture of his relationship with Rebecca, his financial deceptions, and his systematic preparation to leave our marriage while keeping me in the dark about his intentions. Michael's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. Where did you get all this? The credit card statements are from our joint accounts, which I have every legal right to monitor. The photographs were taken in public places by a private investigator I hired 6 weeks ago. The phone records are from our family plan, which I manage. Everything here was obtained legally and ethically. 6 weeks ago, after confirming my suspicions about his affair, I had contacted Jennifer Walsh, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases. Jennifer was a former police detective with an impeccable reputation and a network of contacts throughout the city. She had been thorough, professional, and discreet. You hired a private investigator, Michael said, his voice barely audible. I hired someone to document the truth, since you seemed disinclined to provide it yourself. The photographs were particularly damning. Michael and Rebecca entering hotels together, sharing intimate dinners, shopping for furniture at high-end stores that catered to couples setting up new homes. There were images of them looking at real estate, examining properties that fit the Connecticut lifestyle he had mentioned earlier. Sarah, this is invasion of privacy. This could be considered harassment. I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. Actually, it's evidence gathering. Something that becomes quite important in divorce proceedings, especially when one party has been systematically hiding assets and planning to dissolve the marriage without full disclosure. The phone records were perhaps the most revealing documents in the folder. They showed hundreds of calls and text messages between Michael and Rebecca over the past 8 months, often during hours when he claimed to be in business meetings or working late at the office. I can explain the phone calls, Michael said weakly. I'm sure you can. Just as I'm sure you can explain the weekend in Vermont that was supposedly a business retreat, or the jewelry purchases that never made it home to me, or the apartment lease you co-signed with Rebecca last month. Michael's head snapped up. How did you know about the apartment? Because Jennifer is very thorough, and because you used our joint account to pay the security deposit before transferring the money to your personal account. Did you really think I wouldn't notice a $5,000 withdrawal? The apartment had been the final piece of evidence I needed to understand the full scope of Michael's deception. He hadn't just been having an affair, he had been systematically preparing to abandon our marriage while keeping me unaware of his plans. The apartment lease, signed just 3 weeks ago, proved that his divorce filing wasn't a spontaneous decision born of marital dissatisfaction, but the culmination of months of calculated planning. Michael was staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. This makes me look terrible. It makes you look like exactly what you are, I said quietly. Someone who decided to end our marriage but lacked the courage to be honest about it. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Michael worked in marketing, supposedly skilled at managing perceptions and crafting narratives, yet he had left a trail of evidence so obvious that even an amateur could have followed it. His arrogance had been his downfall. He had assumed that I was too trusting, too busy with my own career, too comfortable in our routine to question his sudden changes in behavior. What do you want, Sarah? he asked. Finally, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. I want honesty, I said. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth about everything. When you started the affair, when you decided to leave, what you've been planning, and what you hope to accomplish by blindsiding me tonight. Michael was quiet for so long that I wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued, stripped of the theatrical confidence he had displayed earlier. It started last year at the company retreat. Rebecca was new, ambitious, excited about the projects we were working on. She made me feel important again, relevant. When I talked, she listened. When I shared ideas, she was enthusiastic. Unlike his wife, who had heard the same recycled business philosophies and grand plans for 23 years, who had learned to nod politely while mentally calculating how much his latest scheme was likely to cost us. We started having coffee together, then lunch meetings that ran long, then drinks after work. I told myself it was just friendship, mentorship even. Rebecca was young and eager to learn from someone with my experience. I almost smiled at that rationalization. The experienced mentor guiding the eager young professional, a story as old as time and about as original as he was. When did it become physical? Michael flinched at my directness. 3 months ago, we were working late on a presentation and one thing led to another. Sarah, I never meant for it to go that far. 3 months ago, I remembered that period clearly now. How he had suddenly become unavailable for our usual Thursday dinner dates, how he had started working weekends and coming home energized in a way that had initially pleased me. I had thought he was finally finding fulfillment in his career again. And when did you decide to leave me for her? It wasn't like that. It wasn't a decision I made overnight. We started talking about the future, about what we both wanted from life. Rebecca has goals, Sarah. She's ambitious. She wants to travel, to take risks, to build something significant. Everything, in other words, that he perceived me as lacking. Never mind that I had built a successful career in one of the most competitive fields in the art world, that I had supported his ambitions even when they conflicted with my own, that I had been taking calculated risks and building something significant for decades. So you decided that I was holding you back from the life you deserved. You're happy with the status quo, Sarah. You have your job, your routines, your collections. You don't need anything more from life. I stared at him, genuinely shocked by this revelation. After 23 years of marriage, he had no idea who I actually was, what I wanted, or what dreams I had been quietly nurturing while supporting his various pursuits. You think I'm happy with the status quo, aren't you? When was the last time you suggested we do something spontaneous, go somewhere new, take a risk on something uncertain? When was the last time we had the financial stability to take risks? I wanted to ask. When was the last time I could suggest something spontaneous, without worrying about whether it would conflict with his latest business venture or career transition? When was the last time he had asked what I wanted to do, rather than assuming I was content to facilitate his desires? I see, I said instead. And your plan was to file for divorce, move in with Rebecca, and start this exciting new life, without the burden of a wife who lacks ambition. It sounds horrible when you put it like that. It sounds honest when I put it like that. Michael pushed the folder away from him as if distancing himself from the evidence would somehow change its implications. What happens now, Sarah? Now you're going to call your attorney and inform him that there are some significant assets that were omitted from your initial filing. And if I don't? I smiled, the same smile I used with museum patrons who tried to negotiate down the price of authenticity certificates. Then I'll call him myself, along with providing copies of this documentation to my own attorney, who has been reviewing your divorce filing with considerable interest. Michael's eyes widened. You have an attorney? I've had an attorney for 3 weeks, Michael. Did you really think I would be unprepared for something like this? The truth was, I had contacted Margaret Hensley the day after confirming Michael's affair. Margaret was a partner at one of the city's most prestigious family law firms, known for her skill in high-asset divorces and her ability to protect clients from spouses who tried to hide or minimize marital property. Our first meeting had been eye-opening. Margaret had reviewed our financial situation, examined the evidence I had gathered, and provided a preliminary assessment of what divorce proceedings would likely entail. Her conclusion was that Michael's proposed settlement was not only inadequate but potentially fraudulent in its omission of significant marital assets. Margaret has been very thorough in her review of our situation, I continued. She's particularly interested in the apartment lease you signed with Rebecca, since it suggests that you've been using marital funds to establish a separate residence with your girlfriend. Michael's face had gone completely white. That's not how it was intended. Intention is less important than documentation, Michael. And the documentation suggests that you've been systematically preparing to abandon our marriage while hiding your plans and misrepresenting our financial situation. The beauty of having comprehensive evidence was that it eliminated the he said she said dynamic that often plagued divorce proceedings. There was no ambiguity about Michael's intentions, no room for him to claim that the affair was a recent mistake, or that his desire for divorce was sudden and unexpected. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "I want you to withdraw your current filing and start this process honestly. Full financial disclosure, proper asset valuation, and a realistic assessment of what we've built together over 23 years. Michael was quiet for several minutes, staring at the ruins of our anniversary dinner. The candles had burned low, wax pooling on the table surface, and our untouched food had grown cold. It was a fitting metaphor for our marriage, I thought. All the careful preparation and romantic intention, reduced to waste because of his selfishness and poor timing. "And if I agree to do this properly?" he asked. "Then we proceed through divorce proceedings like civilized adults, with proper legal representation and full disclosure of all assets and debts. And the photographs, the documentation, become part of the legal record as they should be." Michael nodded slowly, finally beginning to understand that his carefully orchestrated plan had backfired completely. Instead of blindsiding me with divorce papers and manipulating me into accepting an inadequate settlement, he had walked into a situation where I held all the cards, and he was playing catch-up. "I need to call Rebecca," he said quietly. "I'm sure you do. I imagine she's going to be very interested to learn about the actual financial implications of your divorce, particularly since she's apparently been planning a lifestyle based on assets that don't exist in the way you've described them." This was perhaps the most satisfying part of the evening's revelations. Rebecca had been planning her future based on Michael's inflated descriptions of his wealth and earning potential. The reality of divorce proceedings, proper asset division, and legal fees was going to come as an unpleasant surprise to both of them. Michael stood up from the table, his movements slow and uncertain. "I'll need to get some things from the bedroom. Of course, I'll be here when you're ready to continue this conversation." As he left the room, I began clearing the table, wrapping the untouched food and blowing out the candles. The domestic normalcy of these actions felt surreal after the magnitude of what had just transpired, but routine has always been comforting to me in moments of crisis. My phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret Hensley. "How did the anniversary dinner go? Call me tomorrow and we'll discuss next steps." I smiled, typing back a quick response. "Very educational, we'll call first thing in the morning." Margaret had been cautiously optimistic about our case from the beginning. Michael's behavior suggested that he was either poorly advised by his attorney or had been less than honest about our financial situation when seeking legal counsel. Either scenario worked in my favor, particularly given the comprehensive documentation we had assembled. When Michael returned to the sunroom, he was carrying a small suitcase and his laptop bag. "I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight," he said. "We both need time to process this." "That's probably wise." He paused at the doorway, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sarah, for what it's worth, I am sorry about the timing. I know tonight should have been special." "Tonight was special, Michael, just not in the way you intended." After he left, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat in the quiet sunroom, surrounded by the art collection that had become so much more valuable than either of us had realized. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Michael had been planning his exit strategy, I had unknowingly been building the foundation for my own financial independence. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed my sister Catherine's number. "Sarah, I just got the strangest call from Michael. He said you two are getting divorced?" I took a sip of wine before answering.
That's correct, Kath.
He filed papers this morning and told me tonight. Tonight? On your anniversary. Sarah, what happened? As I began explaining the events of the evening to my sister, I realized that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring phone calls to attorneys, financial advisors, and friends. There would be paperwork to file, assets to protect, and a new life to begin building. But tonight, sitting in my sunroom, surrounded by beautiful art and the remnants of a marriage that had ended exactly as it deserved to, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. The following morning brought the first of many phone calls that would reshape my world. Michael's attorney, David Henderson, contacted me directly, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. Mrs. Matthews, my client has informed me that there were some assets omitted from our initial filing. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss amendments. I sipped my coffee slowly, enjoying the panic I could hear beneath his professional tone. Of course, Mr. Henderson, I assume Michael shared the documentation I provided regarding the actual scope of our marital property. There was a long pause before he responded.
Yes, he did.
Mrs. Matthews, I have to ask, are these valuations accurate? The art collection alone represents a significant oversight. Oversight, such a diplomatic way to describe what amounted to either gross incompetence or deliberate fraud. Every piece has been professionally appraised within the last 18 months. I can provide certificates of authenticity and current market assessments for each item. The next call came from Rebecca herself, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. Sarah, we need to talk. Michael told me about last night, and I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I don't believe we have anything to discuss, Rebecca. Please, just 5 minutes. I'm not the villain here. Michael told me you two were already separated, that the divorce was amicable. I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth. The desperation in her voice was almost pitiable. Almost, what truth would that be? Rebecca, that he was still lying to you, still pretending everything was fine while planning to leave. He told me you knew about us, that you were okay with it. I had to admire Michael's efficiency in lying to multiple people simultaneously. He had convinced me that nothing was wrong while convincing Rebecca that everything was already resolved. It was actually an impressive feat of deception, if you could overlook the complete moral bankruptcy of it. I see, and now that you know the actual situation. Rebecca's voice became smaller, more uncertain. Now I'm wondering what else he lied about. The apartment we looked at, the trips we planned, the life he promised me. None of it's real, is it? I suspect you're beginning to understand that Michael has a complicated relationship with reality. After hanging up, I drove to Margaret's office, where she had already begun preparing for what she described as one of the most straightforward cases of her career. Your husband's attorney is scrambling, she said with obvious satisfaction. They're requesting mediation now, which tells me they know they have no leverage for litigation. The mediation session took place the following week in a sterile conference room downtown. Michael arrived looking haggard, accompanied by his clearly uncomfortable attorney. Rebecca was notably absent, a development that spoke volumes about the stability of their relationship under pressure. Let's discuss realistic asset division, Margaret began, spreading documents across the table. Based on proper valuations and full disclosure of marital property, Michael's portion of our combined assets, after legal fees and proper division, would leave him with enough to maintain a modest lifestyle, but nowhere near the wealth he had promised Rebecca. The Connecticut properties they had been viewing were far beyond his actual means, as was the luxury lifestyle he had been describing to his girlfriend. This is vindictive, Michael said quietly, staring at the financial projections. You're trying to punish me. I'm trying to protect myself, I corrected. Something I should have been doing years ago. The final settlement was signed 6 weeks later. Michael received his fair share according to law, which amounted to significantly less than he had expected, and far less than he had promised Rebecca. The art collection remained mine, as did the Hampton house and the majority of our retirement accounts. Rebecca had ended their relationship 2 weeks after our mediation session, apparently deciding that a marketing executive of modest means was less appealing than the wealthy businessman Michael had pretended to be. She was reportedly dating a real estate developer now, someone whose financial status was more easily verified. Michael moved into a small apartment across town, a far cry from the Connecticut estate he had envisioned. His business suffered as word of the divorce proceedings spread through our social circle, with several clients questioning his judgment and reliability. Reputation, as I had learned in the art world, was both fragile and valuable. I kept our home, transforming Michael's former office into a private gallery space where I began hosting small exhibitions featuring emerging artists. The work was fulfilling in a way that my museum position, despite its prestige, had never been. I was discovering parts of myself that had been dormant during my marriage, interests and ambitions that I had set aside to support Michael's ever-changing dreams. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected call from Michael. His voice was subdued, lacking the confidence that had once defined him. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask, but I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not just for the affair or the way I handled the divorce, but for taking you for granted all those years." I was quiet for a moment, considering his words. What brought this on, Michael? Therapy mostly, and losing Rebecca, and realizing that I destroyed something real for something that was never going to work. She wasn't interested in building a life with me, Sarah. She was interested in the life she thought I could provide. "I'm sorry you're hurting, Michael. I genuinely am. Do you think there's any chance we could be friends eventually?" "Not now, I know it's too soon, but someday." I looked around my transformed home, at the gallery walls displaying works by artists I was helping to launch, at the life I had built from the ruins of our marriage. "I think we're both becoming different people, Michael. Maybe someday those people can be friends." The conversation ended cordially, without bitterness or false promises. Later that evening, as I prepared for a gallery opening featuring 3 young painters I had been mentoring, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The woman who had sat at that anniversary dinner 8 months ago, blindsided by her husband's betrayal, felt like a different person entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Saw the review of your gallery in the Times. Mom and Dad would be so proud." She was right. My parents, both art lovers who had supported my early career ambitions, would have been thrilled to see me finally pursuing the gallery work I had always dreamed about. It had taken the end of my marriage to remember that I had dreams of my own, separate from the supporting role I had played in Michael's life. The gallery opening was a success, with 2 pieces selling to collectors I had known for years through my museum work. As I watched visitors appreciate the art I had chosen, and the space I had created, I felt a satisfaction that was entirely my own. No one could take credit for this achievement, no one could diminish it or claim it was somehow dependent on their support or approval. Michael had wanted to start a new life without me, and in the end he had given me something far more valuable than he had intended. He had given me the opportunity to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be the perfect wife to someone who couldn't appreciate what he had. Standing in my gallery that night, surrounded by beautiful art and genuine friends, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's happiness. Sometimes it's about building something so much better than what you lost, that you can't imagine why you ever thought you needed them in the first place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.